There are places on the internet that most of us will never see, corners of the digital world where the rules don't apply, and where the worst of humanity hides behind screens and encrypted connections. Tonight, we're going to peel back the layers of the web and descend into some of the most disturbing, most unsettling, and most genuinely terrifying rabbit holes the internet has ever produced. These stories are all real, so settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. If you were browsing the internet in 2011, there's a good chance you had no idea that a revolution was quietly unfolding beneath the surface of the web you knew. The internet most people used, the one with search engines and social media and online shopping, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lay something called the deep web, a vast, unsearchable ocean of content, hidden from Google and Bing and every other index. And deeper still, accessed only through a specialized browser called Tor, was the dark web, a shadowy digital underworld where anonymity was king. And in early 2011, someone decided to build a marketplace there, a place where you could buy and sell almost anything, free from the watchful eye of any government on Earth. That someone was a 26-year-old from Austin, Texas, named Ross William Ulbricht, and the marketplace he built would come to be known as the Silk Road. Ross Ulbricht didn't fit the profile of a criminal mastermind, at least not on the surface. He was raised in a comfortable home, went to good schools, earned a degree in physics from the University of Texas at Dallas, and then a master's in materials science and engineering from Penn State. He was soft-spoken, well-liked, and idealistic. He practiced yoga, meditated, and talked openly about wanting to change the world. His friends and family described him as gentle and curious, the kind of guy who read philosophy books for fun and believed deeply in personal freedom. But somewhere along the way, those ideals curdled into something darker. Ulbricht was drawn to libertarianism, the political philosophy that champions minimal government interference in people's lives. He believed that the war on drugs was a moral failure, that adults should be free to put whatever they wanted into their own bodies, and that the government had no right to tell people what they could and couldn't buy. And so, fueled by those convictions and armed with a talent for coding, he launched the Silk Road. In February of 2011, he named it after the ancient trade routes that once connected Asia and Europe. And in many ways, the comparison was apartment. Just as those original routes carried silk and spices across continents, this new Silk Road would carry goods across the digital ether. Only the goods being traded here were narcotics, fake identification documents, hacking software, and more. The site operated on the Tor network, which bounced a user's internet traffic through a chain of servers scattered around the globe, masking their location and identity. Transactions were conducted using Bitcoin, a then obscure cryptocurrency that allowed buyers and sellers to exchange money without revealing who they were. The combination of Tor and Bitcoin created a nearly impenetrable cloak of anonymity. You could browse the Silk Road's listings the way you might browse Amazon, complete with product descriptions, user reviews, and seller ratings. Except instead of books and electronics, you were looking at pages of heroin, cocaine, MDMA, LSD, and a pharmacy's worth of prescription drugs. The site exploded in popularity. Within 2 years, it had facilitated over $1.2 billion in transactions, with Ulbricht skimming a commission off every sale. He adopted the online persona of the Dread Pirate Roberts, a name lifted from the classic film The Princess Bride, where the character's identity is passed from one person to the next, making the true bearer impossible to pin down. And for a while, that metaphor held. No one knew who the Dread Pirate Roberts really was. He was a ghost, a username, a myth. He posted philosophical musings on the Silk Road's forums, waxing about freedom and economic liberty. He was charming and articulate, and his followers treated him like a prophet. But beneath the rhetoric, things were rotting. The Silk Road wasn't just a harmless experiment in free markets. People were overdosing on drugs purchased through the site. At least 6 deaths were directly linked to substances bought on the Silk Road. And Ulbricht himself was changing. The power and paranoia that came with running a billion-dollar criminal enterprise began to consume him. When he suspected that one of his employees, a moderator named Curtis Green, had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin and might cooperate with law enforcement, Ulbricht allegedly paid $80,000 to have the man killed. What he didn't know was that the hitman he hired was actually an undercover DEA agent. The agent staged Green's death, photographing him lying face down, his body smeared with Campbell's soup to simulate the aftermath of asphyxiation, and sent the photos to Ulbricht as proof. Ulbricht reportedly expressed satisfaction. This wouldn't be the only murder for hire he allegedly commissioned. Prosecutors would later allege he solicited at least 6 killings, though none were carried out. Meanwhile, law enforcement was closing in. An IRS agent named Gary Alford made the breakthrough. He searched for the earliest mentions of the Silk Road online and found posts by a user called Altoid, promoting the site on drug forums and Bitcoin message boards. In one of those posts, Altoid had included an email address, rosselbricht@gmail.com. It was a staggering lapse in operational security, the kind of mistake that seems almost impossible for someone running one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises on the internet. But that's the thing about rabbit holes. Eventually, even the smartest people slip. On October 1st, 2013, FBI agents tracked Ulbricht to the Glen Park branch of the San Francisco Public Library. He was sitting at a table with his laptop open, logged into the Silk Road's admin panel. 2 agents staged a fake argument behind him, and when he turned to look, a 3rd agent snatched the laptop before he could close it. The screen showed everything. The Dread Pirate Roberts was unmasked. The arrest itself was a masterpiece of planning. Agents knew they had to seize Ulbricht's laptop while it was open and logged in, because if he managed to close it, the encrypted hard drive would lock, and potentially all the evidence would be lost forever. 2 agents positioned behind Ulbricht staged a loud, convincing argument, a fake lover's quarrel designed to make him turn his head. The moment he looked away, a 3rd agent lunged forward and grabbed the laptop from his hands. The screen glowed with the Silk Road's administrator dashboard. It was over. Ulbricht's trial began in January 2015 in federal court in Manhattan. In a surprising opening move, Ulbricht's defense actually admitted that he had created the Silk Road, but the defense argued that he had handed control of the site over to others shortly after its creation, and that the real Dread Pirate Roberts was someone else entirely, specifically Mark Karpels, the head of the now collapsed Mount. Gox Bitcoin exchange. The judge, however, ruled that speculative statements about other people running the site would not be allowed. Over the course of 4 weeks, prosecutors presented mountains of evidence, chat logs, financial records, and journal entries recovered from Ulbricht's laptop that demonstrated he had been running the site the entire time. After less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted him on all 7 counts, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise. Judge Catherine Forrest sentenced him to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, she told Ulbricht directly that the Silk Road was not some noble economic experiment, but a vehicle for criminal transactions on an enormous scale. It was a punishment that many considered extraordinarily harsh for a first-time offender, and it sparked a fierce debate about justice in the digital age that continues to this day. Ulbricht's ex-girlfriend, Julia V., who had met him at Penn State and watched helplessly as he became consumed by the project, later described the heartbreak of watching a man she loved disappear into his computer screen. She recalled begging him to leave San Francisco and come visit her in Austin, telling him she had a terrible feeling that something was about to go wrong. He told her he needed a few more weeks to finish up some things. Those weeks never came. The Silk Road saga had one final, almost unbelievable twist. In January 2025, President Donald Trump granted Ulbricht a full and unconditional pardon, fulfilling a campaign promise he had made at the Libertarian National Convention. Trump called Ulbricht's sentence absurd and characterized those who prosecuted him as part of a system that had been weaponized. And just like that, after more than 11 years behind bars, one of the internet's most infamous figures walked free. But the Silk Road's legacy endures. In the years since its shutdown, dozens of copycat marketplaces have sprung up on the dark web. Each one eventually falls, taken down by law enforcement, only to be replaced by another. The genie, it seems, was never going back into the bottle. And if the Silk Road showed us the dark web's capacity for commerce, then what happened next showed us the internet's capacity for mystery on a completely different scale. On January 4th, 2012, an anonymous image appeared on 4chan, one of the internet's most chaotic and unpredictable message boards. The image was simple, just white text on a black background, and it read, quote, "Hello, we are looking for highly intelligent individuals. To find them, we have devised a test. There is a message hidden in this image. Find it, and it will lead you on the road to finding us. Good luck." It was signed with a single number, 3,301, and thus began what many consider to be the most elaborate and mysterious puzzle the internet has ever seen. A rabbit hole that would come to be known as Cicada, 3,301. At first, most people on 4chan assumed it was a joke. The forum was notorious for trolls and hoaxes, and the idea that a cryptic image posted on an anonymous board was some kind of legitimate recruitment tool seemed absurd. But the skeptics were quickly silenced. Hidden within the pixels of that initial image was a message encoded using steganography, the practice of concealing information inside digital files. Those who extracted the hidden text were led to a series of increasingly complex puzzles that demanded knowledge of cryptography, number theory, classical literature, philosophy, and even music. Joel Eriksson, a Swedish cryptosecurity researcher, was one of the few people to solve the first round of puzzles, working entirely on his own. He later told Fast Company magazine that he initially thought it would be a simple brain teaser, but the challenge quickly grew far more elaborate than he anticipated. Each layer peeled back to reveal another, deeper puzzle beneath. Solvers had to decode Caesar ciphers, crack book codes referencing obscure texts, analyze the metadata of digital images, and follow trails that led to anonymous email addresses and hidden pages on the Tor network. The dimensions of that very first image, 503 by 509 pixels, were both prime numbers, and when multiplied together with 3,301, the product was 845,145,127, which turned out to be a URL that led to a website displaying a countdown timer and the image of a cicada. When the countdown expired, it was replaced with GPS coordinates scattered across the globe. And then the puzzle leaped from the digital world into the physical one. Those coordinates pointed to specific locations in cities around the globe, including spots in the United States, Spain, Russia, France, Japan, and Poland. At these locations, paper posters had been affixed to telephone poles and walls, each bearing a QR code that led to the next stage of the challenge. Someone, or some organization, had the resources and the reach to plant clues on multiple continents simultaneously, each within an hour's drive of a major airport. This was not the work of a bored teenager in a basement. This was organized, funded, and global. The puzzles drew on an astonishing range of disciplines. Solvers needed familiarity with the poetry of William Blake, the writings of medieval mystics, the mathematics of prime numbers, and the technical intricacies of PGP encryption and Tor hidden services. There were original pieces of music composed specifically for the puzzles, titled The Instar Emergence and Interconnectedness, which contained hidden data within their audio files. There were bootable Linux CDs and pages from unpublished books written in runes. Each element was designed to test not just intelligence, but a very particular kind of intelligence, one that bridged the gap between the technical and the philosophical, between code and culture. The puzzles returned on January 4th, 2013, and again on January 4th, 2014, each round more fiendishly complex than the last. The 2014 iteration centered around a strange digital book called the Liber Primus, Latin for first book, written entirely in Anglo-Saxon runes. Of its 74 pages, only 19 have ever been decoded, even by the combined efforts of thousands of the internet's brightest minds working together in dedicated forums and chat rooms. The remaining pages remain a locked vault that no one has been able to crack. So who was behind it? That's the question that continues to haunt the internet to this day. Theories range widely. Some believed Cicada 3301 was a covert recruitment tool for intelligence agencies like the CIA, NSA, or MI6, a way to identify individuals with exceptional skills in cryptography and computer security without revealing the agency's involvement. Others suggested it was the work of a secret society, a modern-day Illuminati using the puzzles to find and vet potential members. Still others proposed that it was an elaborate art project or academic experiment in collective problem-solving. According to Marcus Warner, who solved the first puzzle in 2012, those who completed the challenges were invited to a private online forum where they were asked about their views on privacy, censorship, and information freedom. Those who answered satisfactorily were reportedly invited to collaborate on a secret project, though the exact nature of that project has never been publicly disclosed. Cicada 3301 posted its last verified message in April 2017, a warning to beware false paths and always verify their cryptographic signature. After that, silence. No new puzzles. No new messages. Just the unsolved Liber Primus, sitting there like a locked door in an empty hallway, waiting for someone clever enough to find the key. And while Cicada 3301 was an exercise in brilliance and anonymity, the next rabbit hole we're going to explore is a far darker study in what happens when someone craves attention so badly that they'll do literally anything to get it. In 2010, a video surfaced online that showed a young man placing 2 live kittens inside a vacuum-sealed bag and suffocating them. The footage was brief, grainy, and profoundly disturbing, and it set off a firestorm across the internet, Animal lovers, activists, and ordinary people who stumbled across the footage were outraged, and a group of determined online sleuths, led largely through Facebook groups, began trying to identify the person responsible. They would eventually succeed. But by the time they did, the man behind the camera had already graduated from killing animals to killing a human being. His name was Luka Magnotta, born Eric Clinton Kirk Newman on July 24, 1982, in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada. From the beginning, Magnotta's life was marked by dysfunction. His mother, Anna Yorkin, was reportedly obsessed with cleanliness to the point of compulsion, and his father was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. Magnotta himself would eventually receive the same diagnosis. He bounced between schools and homes, never quite fitting in, never quite finding whatever it was he was looking for. What he did find, eventually, was the internet, and the internet would become both his stage and his weapon. Magnotta was obsessed with fame. He underwent multiple cosmetic surgeries, auditioned for reality television shows, worked briefly as an escort and in low-budget adult films, and spent an extraordinary amount of time cultivating his online presence. He maintained what police later estimated to be around 70 Facebook pages and 20 websites, many of them sock puppet accounts, fake profiles he created to pose as fans of himself. He left glowing comments on his own posts, built fan pages in his own honor, and fabricated an entirely false persona of wealth, beauty, and success. He even started a rumor that he had once dated Karla Homolka, one of Canada's most notorious killers, apparently hoping that even that kind of association would boost his profile. When the kitten-killing videos surfaced, internet users were appalled. A Facebook group called Find the Vacuum Kitten Killer quickly swelled to thousands of members, many of whom devoted hours to analyzing every frame of the footage, looking for identifying details. One user, a woman named Deanna Thompson, who went by the online handle Bowdy Movin', became particularly consumed by the search. She and a growing network of collaborators found clues embedded in the videos, background details like the pattern on a bedspread, the style of an electrical outlet, and a recognizable brand of vacuum bag that suggested the person filming was in North America, likely Canada, possibly Toronto, or Montreal. They tracked down IP addresses associated with the video uploads, cross-referenced timestamps with local weather conditions visible through windows, and painstakingly assembled a profile of their suspect. Another key figure in the online investigation was a man named John Green, who ran an animal rescue organization and had been tracking reports of animal cruelty online. Green and Thompson worked in tandem, pooling information across time zones and continents. They eventually identified the man in the videos as Luka Magnotta, a finding supported by the fact that Magnotta had previously posted videos of himself on YouTube and other platforms, providing a visual match. Thompson shared her findings with law enforcement in Toronto, including an address she had obtained from GPS data embedded in an old photograph of Magnotta. Officers went to the address, but the apartment had been recently vacated. The police response, or rather, the lack of one, would later become a source of immense frustration and grief. As Thompson later recounted, the authorities essentially dismissed her evidence because the victims were just cats. It was a tragic miscalculation that would haunt everyone involved. Then, on May 25th, 2012, an 11-minute video was uploaded to a shock content website called Best Gore. The title was One Lunatic, One Ice Pick. What the video showed was the murder and dismemberment of a man later identified as Jun Lin, a 33-year-old Chinese international student attending Concordia University in Montreal. Jun Lin had responded to a Craigslist ad posted by Magnotta. The video was filmed in Magnotta's apartment, with the song True Faith by New Order playing in the background and a poster for the film Casablanca hanging on the wall. The details of what was captured on camera are too disturbing to describe in full, but it included stabbing, dismemberment, and acts of desecration that shocked even hardened investigators. In the days that followed, Magnotta mailed Jun Lin's severed hands and feet to the headquarters of Canada's Conservative and Liberal parties in Ottawa, as well as to 2 elementary schools in Vancouver. A janitor at Magnotta's apartment building found a torso inside a suitcase that had been left with the garbage. Police traced the suitcase back to Magnotta's blood-soaked apartment, but by then, he was gone. What followed was an international manhunt. Magnotta fled to Paris and then to Berlin, Germany, where Interpol issued a red notice for his arrest. He was captured on June 4, 2012, at an internet cafe in the Neukölln district of Berlin. When police found him, he was reading news articles about himself. Even in that final moment, it was all about the attention. In December 2014, after a 12-week trial and 8 days of jury deliberation, Magnotta was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The internet sleuths who had tried to warn the world about him before he escalated to murder were left with a haunting question, one that has never been satisfactorily answered. If more attention had been paid when Magnotta was killing animals, could Jun Lin's death have been prevented? And that question, the question of what the internet notices and what it chooses to obsess over, leads us to another case that became one of the most viral mysteries the web has ever known. In January of 2013, a 21-year-old Canadian student named Elisa Lam checked into a budget hostel in downtown Los Angeles called the Stay on Main. What she didn't know, and what most budget travelers passing through wouldn't have known, was that the Stay on Main was actually a rebranded section of one of the most infamous buildings in American history, the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil Hotel had been built in 1924, a grand 700-room establishment with a Beaux-Arts lobby and ambitions to match. But those ambitions faded quickly. Located on the edge of Skid Row, one of the largest concentrations of homeless people in the United States, the hotel became a magnet for transients, addicts, and violent crime almost from the beginning. Over the decades, the Cecil accumulated a body count that would rival a horror franchise. In 1962, a woman named Pauline Otten jumped from a 9th-floor window after an argument with her husband, landing on a pedestrian below and killing them both. In 1964, a retired telephone operator named Pigeon Goldie Osgood was found dead in her room, raped, stabbed, and beaten. Her murder was never solved. The hotel was the temporary home of at least 2 confirmed serial killers. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker who terrorized Los Angeles in the summer of 1985, lived at the Cecil during his killing spree, reportedly coming home after his attacks and disposing of his blood-soaked clothing in the hotel dumpster. And Jack Unterweger, an Austrian journalist and convicted murderer who had been released from prison and was supposedly rehabilitated, stayed at the Cecil in 1991 while murdering at least 3 women in Los Angeles. The building seemed to attract darkness the way a drain attracts water, and by the time Elisa Lam arrived in January 2013, the Cecil had tried to rehabilitate its image by converting several floors into the Stay on Main hostel, complete with its own separate entrance and lobby. but the two establishments shared elevators, stairwells, and the weight of the building's terrible history. Elisa Lam was from Vancouver. She was studying at the University of British Columbia, and she had a passion for writing and exploring new places. She kept a Tumblr blog where she wrote candidly about her life, her struggles with depression and bipolar disorder, and her excitement about her solo trip down the California coast. She was bright, introspective, and by all accounts, deeply kind. She checked into the stay on Main on January 26th and was supposed to check out on February 1st. She never did. Her parents reported her missing on February 8th. For days, police searched the hotel, bringing dogs through the building and combing the floors. They searched her room and found nothing unusual. Then, on February 13th, the LAPD released a piece of surveillance footage that would become one of the most analyzed and debated videos in internet history. The footage, captured by a camera inside one of the Cecil's elevators, showed Elisa Lam on January 31st, the last day she was seen alive. Over the course of about 4 minutes, Lam enters the elevator, presses several buttons, steps in and out repeatedly, peers around the corner as if looking for someone or hiding from something unseen, and makes strange, fluid gestures with her hands. At one point, she appears to be speaking to someone who isn't there. The elevator doors remain open the entire time, never closing despite the buttons being pressed. Then, Lam steps out of frame and doesn't return. The doors eventually close, and the elevator moves on. The video went viral almost instantly. Millions of people watched it, rewatched it, slowed it down frame by frame, and dissected every second. Internet sleuths pointed out what they believed were inconsistencies. Why didn't the elevator doors close? Was there a second person just out of frame? Had the footage been edited? Theories multiplied. Some people believed Lam was being stalked by another guest. Others connected the footage to the Korean elevator game, a ritual supposedly capable of transporting players to another dimension. Still others pointed to the Cecil Hotel's dark history and suggested something paranormal was at work. The truth, when it finally emerged, was far more heartbreaking. On February 19th, hotel guests began complaining about low water pressure and a strange, dark discoloration in the water coming from their taps. A maintenance worker climbed to the roof and checked the hotel's large water cisterns. Inside one of them, he found Elisa Lam's body, floating face up, nude, with her clothing drifting beside her. She had been in the water for nearly 3 weeks. The coroner's report, released months later, ruled her death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. Toxicology tests revealed that Lam had not been drinking or using recreational drugs, but the levels of her prescription medications in her bloodstream were unusually low, suggesting she had not been taking them as prescribed. Investigators concluded that she had likely experienced a psychotic episode, that the erratic behavior in the elevator was a symptom of that episode, and that in her confused and frightened state, she had somehow made her way to the roof, climbed the fire escape, opened the hatch of the water tank, and gotten in, perhaps seeking a hiding place from whatever her mind was telling her was pursuing her. Once inside, she couldn't get out. The internet, however, was largely unsatisfied with this explanation. The case continued to be dissected and debated for years, spawning YouTube videos, Reddit threads, and podcast episodes. In 2021, Netflix released a 4-part documentary series called Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, which both explored and critiqued the online obsession with the case. The documentary ultimately affirmed the coroner's findings, but also shone a light on the darker side of internet sleuthing, the way that collective obsession can turn a real person's tragedy into entertainment, and how the viral nature of the elevator footage transformed Elisa Lam from a young woman who needed help into a character in a horror story. And speaking of the darker side of the internet, there are some rabbit holes that lead to places so disturbing, so genuinely evil, that even seasoned investigators have trouble processing what they find there. The dark web, that hidden layer of the internet, accessible only through specialized browsers, has harbored some of humanity's worst impulses. And perhaps no case illustrates this more starkly than that of an Australian man named Peter Scully. Scully was born in 1963 and lived for years in the Melbourne suburb of Narra Warren with his wife and 2 children. To his neighbors, he appeared to be an ordinary businessman. But in 2011, facing 117 counts of fraud and deception related to a crooked real estate scheme that had cost investors over 2.6 million Australian dollars, Scully fled to the Philippines before he could be charged. And it was there, on the island of Mindanao, that he built something far worse than a financial scam. Scully established a dark web operation that he called No Limits Fun, a site that streamed and sold videos of the most horrific abuse imaginable, targeting the most vulnerable victims possible, children from impoverished families in the Philippines. He exploited the crushing poverty of the region, luring victims with promises of food, education, and work for their struggling families. With the help of accomplices, including 2 Filipino women he had recruited and groomed, one of whom, Carmian Alvarez, was herself a former child victim of exploitation whom Scully had found on the streets. He created and distributed content so extreme that even describing it in general terms is beyond the pale. He charged his dark web clients up to $10,000 per video. One of his productions became one of the most searched for and discussed pieces of content on the dark web, not because people wanted to see it, but because its very existence became a grim legend, a kind of terrible proof of concept that the absolute worst corners of the internet were real and not just urban myths whispered about on forums. The investigation that brought Scully down was an international effort. The Dutch National Child Exploitation Team was the first to open a case after the material surfaced. Working with Philippine authorities, Australian law enforcement, and Interpol, investigators painstakingly traced digital footprints and identified victims. On February 20th, 2015, agents from the National Bureau of Investigation of the Philippines raided Scully's hideout in Malaybalay City and arrested him. They found hard drives, computers, and an overwhelming amount of evidence. What investigators uncovered during the arrest exceeded even their worst expectations. At least one victim, a young girl, had been killed and buried beneath a house Scully had rented. Other victims were found alive, but bearing lasting physical and psychological injuries. Scully faced a total of 75 charges involving 7 confirmed victims. Margaret Aculo, a project coordinator for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and an expert on child abuse investigations, called the case horrific and one of the worst she had ever encountered. Some prosecutors argued that the Philippines should reinstate the death penalty specifically for Scully. In June 2018, Scully was sentenced to life in prison for human trafficking and multiple counts of assault. In November 2022, he received a second conviction and was sentenced to an additional 129 years. His primary accomplice, Liesl Margallo, received 126 years. 2 other accomplices received 9 years each. Disturbingly, even from behind bars, Scully and Margallo reportedly maintained contact through smuggled phones, and there were allegations they continued to coordinate elements of the operation from prison. In October 2015, a fire severely damaged the evidence room containing Scully's computer logs and videos, destroying key evidence. Some investigators suspected that Scully had bribed a local police officer to set the fire, a suspicion underscored by the well-documented corruption within Philippine law enforcement. The case served as a brutal wake-up call about the realities of the dark web and the lengths to which predators will go to exploit anonymity. It also highlighted the staggering vulnerability of children in impoverished regions and the critical, urgent need for international cooperation in combating online exploitation. Scully's arrest led to the dismantling of several other exploitation networks and prompted governments around the world to invest more heavily in cybercrime enforcement and cross-border collaboration. And while Scully's case represents the absolute bottom of what the internet can enable, our next story is a different kind of darkness altogether. It's the story of a man who believed his local police department was out to destroy him, who documented every suspicious detail he could find, and who predicted, in chilling detail, exactly how his life would end. His name was John Lang, and he lived in Fresno, California. John Lang was 51 years old, and by most accounts lived a fairly ordinary life until he stumbled onto something that he believed made him a target. According to Lang, he discovered that the Fresno Police Department had been running a scheme involving automated license plate scanners. The way Lang described it, officers would scan the plates of cars parked at retail stores like Save Mart, Home Depot, and Vons in lower-income neighborhoods, collecting data on vehicles with outstanding violations. They would then pull those drivers over a few blocks away, claiming the stop was the result of a routine patrol rather than the scanning operation. In Lang's view, this amounted to a predatory revenue generation scheme, targeting the city's most vulnerable residents. Lang began posting about this on local blogs and news websites, particularly in the comment sections of the Fresno Bee, the city's main newspaper. At first, his comments were anonymous, protected by the veil of internet usernames. But when the Fresno Bee moved its comment section to Facebook in an effort to reduce trolling, Lang's real identity was suddenly exposed to anyone who cared to look. According to Lang, a reporter at the newspaper named Judy Murray leaked his personal information, including his IP address, to a staff sergeant at the Fresno County Sheriff's Office named Jared McCormick. From that point on, Lang claimed, his life became a waking nightmare of surveillance, intimidation, and psychological warfare. He said he was followed everywhere he went by police vehicles and unmarked cars. He described being pulled over repeatedly without cause, having strangers approach him in parking lots, and noticing the same unfamiliar faces showing up in different locations throughout his day. His marriage, already under strain, collapsed under the pressure. Lang installed a comprehensive network of security cameras around his home and began uploading footage to a YouTube channel he created. Videos that he said showed suspicious vehicles parked outside his house at odd hours, unknown individuals walking slowly past his property and peering through windows, and what he described as organized surveillance and intimidation campaigns designed to break him psychologically. He created a personal website that served as a daily diary of his experiences, documenting every incident with timestamps, photographs, and exhaustive written accounts. The response from those who encountered Lang's material was deeply divided. To some, Lang's accounts had the clear ring of credibility, especially given Fresno's extraordinarily well-documented history of police misconduct and corruption. The city had been flagged by the Cato Institute as having one of the highest rates of police misconduct of any city in America. An independent study that same year found Fresno to be the worst California city for lack of governmental transparency. In 2013, the city had implemented a controversial predictive policing program that used computer algorithms to supposedly identify potential criminals before they committed crimes. In 2014, the Fresno police chief had traveled to Israel to study surveillance technology used to monitor the Palestinian population. And just months before Lang's death, the FBI had busted the department's deputy chief and 3 other officers for dealing heroin and other drugs, a scandal that revealed corruption at the highest levels of the organization. If there was any city in America where a whistleblower might genuinely be targeted by local police, Fresno had a strong claim. To others, however, Lang's increasingly frantic and detailed posts bore the hallmarks of paranoid delusion, a mind spiraling into conspiracy and interpreting every coincidence as evidence of a vast plot against him. But here's where the story takes a turn that makes it genuinely impossible to dismiss entirely. In the final week of his life, Lang's posts became increasingly desperate, increasingly specific, and increasingly prophetic in a way that sends a chill down your spine when you read them now. On January 13, 2016, he shared a conversation online in which he explained why the police were targeting him. On January 15th, he sent a message to a local reporter through Facebook, saying, in essence, that if he turned up dead, the Fresno Police Department would be responsible. On January 16th, he posted surveillance footage of a van he didn't recognize parked in front of his house, and wrote that if he went missing or died the next day, people should remember this vehicle. On January 20th, 2016, neighbors on Van Ness Avenue in central Fresno saw smoke rising from Lang's home. Firefighters, who happened to be just a few doors down on an unrelated call, forced their way through Lang's heavily secured gate and into the house. Inside, in the kitchen, they found John Lang unconscious and bleeding from multiple stab wounds. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. The official cause of death was ruled to be carbon monoxide poisoning from smoke inhalation, concurrent with the stab wounds. The Fresno County coroner and local media characterized it as a suicide. But for many who had followed Lang's story, the explanation didn't add up. The stab wounds were reportedly on his upper back, a location that would be extraordinarily difficult for someone to reach on their own body. The house had been set on fire, apparently to destroy evidence. And perhaps most chillingly, Lang had predicted almost exactly what would happen to him, down to the timing and the method. The hacktivist collective Anonymous took up Lang's cause, publicly targeting Fresno city officials and threatening to take down the city's website. They declared that John Lang would not be forgotten. To this day, Lang's death remains officially classified as a suicide. No independent investigation has ever been conducted. The surveillance footage he uploaded, the blog posts he wrote, and the desperate messages he sent in his final days remain online, sitting there like a digital time capsule, waiting for someone to look at them and decide for themselves what really happened to a man who believed his own government wanted him dead. It's one of those rabbit holes that the deeper you go, the less certain you become of anything, and that ambiguity is precisely what makes it so unsettling. And speaking of ambiguity and mystery, there is perhaps no greater enigma the internet has produced than the question of who created Bitcoin. It's a rabbit hole that has consumed journalists, hackers, intelligence agencies, and amateur sleuths for over 15 years. And despite the combined efforts of some of the brightest minds in technology and investigative journalism, it remains completely unsolved. The name associated with Bitcoin's creation is Satoshi Nakamoto, But almost certainly, that name is a fiction, a mask worn by a person or persons whose true identity is one of the great unsolved puzzles of the digital age. On October 31st, 2008, a 9-page document titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, appeared on an obscure cryptography mailing list. The paper proposed something that had eluded computer scientists for decades, a way to create a digital currency that couldn't be counterfeited, double-spent, or controlled by any central authority. It was elegant, revolutionary, and almost impossibly well constructed. On January 3rd, 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto mined the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, known as the Genesis block. Embedded within it was a message, a headline from that day's edition of the Times of London. Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It was a statement of intent, a declaration that this new currency was born not out of abstraction, but out of anger at a financial system that had failed the world. For the next 2 years, Nakamoto was active in Bitcoin's development. He communicated with other developers and enthusiasts through forum posts and emails, writing in clean, precise English that sometimes used British spelling conventions like color and favor, which led many to suspect he was based in the United Kingdom, despite claiming to be a Japanese male living in Japan. Analysis of his posting times revealed that he was rarely active between midnight and 6 in the morning GMT, suggesting he kept roughly British hours. He was meticulous, patient, and deeply private. He never shared personal details, never joined a video call, never appeared at any conference or meetup, and never allowed anyone to pin down his real-world identity. He interacted with early Bitcoin adopters and developers, including Hal Finney, who became the recipient of the very first Bitcoin transaction in history when Nakamoto sent him 10 coins as a test on January 12, 2009. The early days of Bitcoin were remarkably modest. The currency had no monetary value for months. The first real-world purchase using Bitcoin didn't occur until May 22, 2010, when a programmer named Laszlo Hanyecz paid 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 Papa John's pizzas, a transaction that at today's prices would be worth roughly $1 billion. But Nakamoto was less interested in Bitcoin's commercial potential than in its philosophical implications. He wrote passionately about the failures of centralized banking, the erosion of financial privacy, and the need for a system that could operate without trust in any single institution. His forum posts read less like those of a programmer and more like those of a political philosopher who happened to write code. Then, in December 2010, he started pulling away. His forum posts became less frequent, his responses shorter and more detached. In April 2011, he sent a final email to a fellow developer named Mike Hearn, writing simply, "I've moved on to other things. It's in good hands with Gavin and everyone." After that, nothing. Satoshi Nakamoto vanished from the internet as completely as if he had never existed. He left behind the most disruptive financial technology since the invention of paper money, a global community of millions of users, and a personal wallet containing an estimated 1.1 million Bitcoin mined in the earliest days of the network. At current prices, that fortune is worth roughly $100 billion. Not a single one of those coins has ever been moved, not once in over 15 years. That fact alone is staggering. It means either Nakamoto has the superhuman discipline to sit on one of the largest fortunes on Earth without touching it, or the private keys to those wallets have been lost, or, perhaps most hauntingly, Nakamoto is no longer alive to spend them. The mystery of Nakamoto's identity has spawned an entire cottage industry of investigation and speculation. Hal Finney, one of the earliest Bitcoin adopters and the first person to receive a Bitcoin transaction from Nakamoto, was an early suspect. He lived in Temple City, California, just blocks away from a man whose birth name happened to be Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. Finney denied being Satoshi before his death in 2014 from ALS. Nick Szabo, a computer scientist and cryptographer who had created a conceptual predecessor to Bitcoin called BitGold, has been widely named by researchers and journalists as the most likely candidate. Szabo has repeatedly denied the claim. Craig Stephen Wright, an Australian academic and programmer, publicly declared himself to be Satoshi Nakamoto in 2016, but his claims were widely rejected by the Bitcoin community, and in 2024, a UK court ruled definitively that Wright was not the creator of Bitcoin, finding that he had forged documents and lied extensively in his attempts to prove the claim. In October 2024, an HBO documentary titled Money Electric: The Bitcoin Mystery pointed the finger at Peter Todd, a Canadian Bitcoin core developer. Todd denied the allegation, calling the film irresponsible and the evidence thin. And so the mystery endures. Perhaps Nakamoto is alive, watching the world from behind a screen, content to let the creation speak for itself. Perhaps they've passed away, and the private keys to that staggering fortune are lost forever. Perhaps Nakamoto was never one person at all, but a small group of brilliant minds who created something together and then agreed, collectively, to disappear. We may never know, and there are those in the Bitcoin community who argue that we shouldn't want to know, that the anonymity of Bitcoin's creator is not a bug, but a feature, a final expression of the decentralized philosophy that Bitcoin itself embodies. And that brings us to one final rabbit hole, one that exists at the very boundary between reality and myth. If you've spent any time exploring the stranger corners of the internet, you've probably encountered the concept of the internet as an iceberg. At the top, visible to everyone, is the surface web, the Google-indexed world of social media, news sites, and online shopping. Below that lies the deep web, the vast ocean of content not indexed by search engines, things like medical records, academic databases, and corporate intranets. Deeper still is the dark web, accessible only through specialized browsers like Tor, where anonymity enables everything from political dissent to criminal marketplaces. But according to a persistent and deeply strange internet legend, there's something even deeper. Below the dark web, at the very bottom of the digital ocean, lies a place called Mariana's Web, named after the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point in the Earth's oceans. A canyon in the Pacific floor that plunges nearly 36,000 feet below the surface. And like its namesake, Mariana's Web is said to be a place of crushing pressure and absolute darkness, a realm so deep and so heavily encrypted that it can only be accessed using quantum computers, technology that, as of today, barely exists even in experimental laboratories. The legend of Mariana's Web first gained traction around 2013, roughly the same time the Silk Road was making international headlines, and the general public was becoming aware that the internet had hidden layers they had never imagined. An infographic began circulating on forums and social media that depicted the internet as having 8 distinct levels, arranged like the layers of an iceberg. At the top was the surface web, Google, Facebook, YouTube. Below that was the deep web, the vast ocean of unindexed content. Deeper still was the dark web, and at the very bottom, shrouded in digital darkness, was Mariana's Web. According to the infographic and the mythology that grew around it, Each level was supposedly darker and more dangerous than the last. The rumors about what Mariana's web contained grew more elaborate and more fantastical over time. Depending on who was telling the story, it held the secret archives of the Vatican, documents that the Catholic Church had accumulated over centuries and kept hidden from the public. It contained the classified files of every intelligence agency on Earth: the CIA, MI6, Mossad, all of them, their deepest and most damaging secrets stored in a digital vault beyond anyone's reach. Some versions of the legend claimed it housed the true location of Atlantis, the lost continent that has captivated human imagination for thousands of years. Others went even further and suggested that Mariana's web was home to a supremely powerful artificial intelligence, a digital consciousness that not only monitored the entire internet, but actively controlled it, deciding what information flowed freely and what was suppressed. Some versions of the myth described something called the Primarch system, an anomaly supposedly detected during deep web scans in the early 2000s, a kind of digital heartbeat pulsing at the center of the internet's deepest infrastructure. According to these accounts, the Primarch system was the thing controlling the internet, and no one even knew what it was. If you reached this level, the stories warned, the people who operated there would know you were looking, and they would come for you. Drug lords, human traffickers, intelligence agencies, all of them guarded access to Mariana's web with lethal force. The appeal of the legend is obvious and deeply human. We have always been drawn to the idea that there are hidden things, forbidden knowledge locked away in places only the most powerful or the most daring can access. The internet, with its genuine hidden layers and its demonstrable capacity for secrecy and horror, is the perfect canvas for this kind of mythology. And the fact that the dark web is real, that the Silk Road existed and generated billions of dollars in transactions, that people like Peter Scully operated genuine criminal empires in hidden corners of the digital world, lends a seductive veneer of plausibility to the idea that maybe, just maybe, there's something even deeper that we haven't found yet. But is Mariana's web real? Almost certainly not. And cybersecurity experts have been saying so consistently for over a decade. The levels of the internet infographic that popularized the myth is not based on any real technical framework. The internet does not have hierarchical layers in the way the legend describes. There is no level 5, no level 8, no secret floor beneath the dark web. The deep web is vast, yes, but it's mostly mundane, consisting of password-protected databases, medical records, and academic journals. The dark web exists, but it's accessible with freely available software, not quantum computers, and no credible source of leaked information, including the massive document dumps from figures like Edward Snowden or organizations like WikiLeaks, has ever referenced anything resembling Mariana's web. No whistleblower, no hacker, no former intelligence agent has ever produced a shred of evidence that it exists. And yet, the legend persists. It persists in YouTube videos with millions of views, in Reddit threads that stretch thousands of comments deep, and in the quiet, late-night conversations of people who have spent too long staring into the glowing void of their screens. It persists because the internet is vast and unknowable, because we've already discovered that terrible things can hide in its crevices, and because there's something deeply, fundamentally human about believing that the map still has uncharted territory. Whether Mariana's web is real or not is almost beside the point. What matters is what the legend reveals about us, about our endless hunger for mystery, our fear of the unknown, and our uneasy suspicion that no matter how deep we dig, there's always something deeper still, just beyond the edge of our understanding, waiting in the dark. And that's where we'll leave things for tonight. The internet is a remarkable creation, a tool that has connected billions of people and transformed every aspect of modern life. But it's also a mirror, and sometimes what it reflects back at us is deeply unsettling. From the billion-dollar drug empires of the Silk Road to the unsolvable puzzles of Cicada 3301, from the viral horror of Luka Magnotta's crimes to the tragic death of Elisa Lam, from the darkest corners of exploitation to the chilling predictions of John Lang, from the vanishing act of Bitcoin's mysterious creator to the enduring myth of Mariana's web, the darkest rabbit holes on the internet remind us that, for all its promise, the digital world is still shaped by the same forces that have always driven humanity: curiosity, ambition, cruelty, obsession, and the relentless, unshakable desire to find what's hidden. These stories stay with us because they touch something primal, a reminder that the frontier never truly closes. It just moves online. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these stories coming. And until next time, sleep well.